Hello, everyone. Welcome back again. Very happy for the second talk of today to welcome Buck Ellison, whose book, Living Trust, is the winner of the First PhotoBook Award from Paris Photo and Aperture Foundation, and is actually on view now at DELPIRE CO in Paris. We are very happy to welcome your publishers, Sarah Piégé-Espenon, is that it, Sarah? Yeah. And Lewis Chaplin, who are loose joints and based in Marseille, and Laurel Parker, who was one of our final jury members based in Romainville near Paris, will lead this talk. So thank you, Laurel. Thank you, everyone. And Laurel, I give you the floor.
Hello, everybody. I just want to say I'm very happy to meet the three of you. And I wanted to say thank you to DELPIRE, to Paris Photo and Aperture for this opportunity to have been on the jury and to have this talk also with the three of you. So I'm not used to doing this kind of thing, so I feel a little shy here. I wanted to say congratulations. It's a very beautiful book. And I don't use the word beautiful lightly because I feel like the book is all about beauty and what beauty means. So that's something that I want to talk to you three about, especially concerning the design of the book, because the photos are really beautiful and the book itself is very beautiful. And I feel like everything, as I said in the little blip that was shown on Instagram, everything about your design choices, the color of the cloth, the color of the end pages, the typography, everything is so beautiful and seductive and perfect. And I feel like that is what this work is about. So I was wondering if the three of you could kind of start talking about that, how you came to these choices in the design of the book.
Maybe we should, Buck, should we jump in first?
Please.
Sure. All right. So yeah, I mean, it feels like another time or like another era when we made this book, like given how 2020 and the process of kind of collaborating with artists has become this much more kind of remote and kind of spread all over the world type of process. But with Living Trust, we were fortunate enough to actually make the book together in person here in Marseille, actually. Like we really did the majority of this project in 2 or 3 very intense days of sitting with one another and talking and discussing and hearing from Buck, you know, what type of object he had in mind, and you know what type of presentation we all felt would be most appropriate for that book. Because I mean, to take it back a little bit further, you know, we actually contacted Buck directly ourselves as publishers. We saw a fantastic show of his work in London at the Sunday Painter, his excellent London gallerist, and Sarah and I were just blown away by, you know, the not only the quality of the work, but also all of these stories and all of this context and all of this research that informs how you know, how Buck approaches his practice. And so I think when we came to sitting down to make Living Trust, I feel like, Buck, maybe you had some specific ideas about the cover and about the format, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, it was really fun. Yeah, let me just talk about what we did, because for me it was such a luxury to come be with you guys in Marseille and see how you work. And then I really I've only made exhibitions before, and we talked a lot about that, like making a book is so different than making an exhibition. So the first thing we did was print out every photo I'd ever made and put it on your dining room table. And we looked at that for about a day.
Yeah.
And what we decided to do, which was really exciting to me, I think we came back again and again to this idea that like the classical or the traditional could be really radical at this point. And so we decided to, I'm going to share the book because that was requested. We decided to group the works into chapters, which, you know, when I show things in exhibitions, is normally there'll be sort of maybe the show you saw in London, for example, there was one still life, there was another smaller still life, and there was this image, Sierra gymnastics routine, and then there were 3 images from this work about Betsy DeVos. And so for us to go back and sort of make a chapter out of something like, so what we've like, let's go with 35 college preparatory schools, San Francisco Bay Area, California.
Here we go.
This was an actual body of work. So starting here, these are images, still lifes I made of these sort of fake gardens at these elite schools near where I grew up. And so we grouped this in the chapter as its own sort of subchapter, but then with this, we also included images that to me really evoked a lot of these questions about status or presentation of status in the Bay Area where I grew up. So this is the Heath Ceramics, is like a local ceramics company. This felt very familiar. So doing that was definitely your idea, you two. And
I can kind of remember this kind of intentional approach to as you kind of said, Buck, about the kind of radicalness of actually doing something traditional. I think we really wanted to lean into a lot of those aesthetics with the way that the book was put together and presented. And so you have a lot of, you know, very intentional things on the page, you know, page numbers, titling, numbered chapters. Even at the beginning, you know, you've got your contents page. At the back, you have a full index of the work. You even have a CV of your, you know, various accomplishments. And all of that, I think, had a level of intentionality to it, which kind of, I think in some ways, you know, as book publishers and designers, we always want to, you know, the design to be an extension of ideas that already exist in the work. And so like how Laurel said, you know, about things appearing very kind of like perfect and beautiful in many of Buck's images, I think it was also about like deliberately, you know, working within that kind of traditional hardcover, you know, cloth cover, and, you know, very kind of an aesthetic that makes you sort of also think about how all of those little choices that any publisher makes about where, you know, how they format that work, it also affects your reading and your contextualizing of the project.
And your relationship.
Well, and if I can jump in here, it seemed almost like a college yearbook or something like that. So
good.
Subversive and you know, it all seems so ironic to me. The first time I looked at it, I took it on a first level. You know, it's this pink book with really beautiful photographs, and then the more I looked at it, I realized that maybe ironic is not the right word, but it was definitely playing with everything that's in the images. This idea of perfection and what the perfection that is found in these images that you've used, the Ralph Lauren ads and all of this kind of thing that you're talking about in your images, is that I feel like it's all being brought to the forefront with the design of the book. Like we're really plunging into that whole universe just by the choice of the size of the book, how it's laid out. And I know that it's you've talked about it being a monograph, but it seems more like a storybook to me than a monograph. That's how I read the book. It's a type of storybook. I don't know if that's how you were looking at it.
I mean, we definitely wanted to tell a story, and yeah, it was such a fun dialogue. Like, I know, for example, we went back and forth about this CV page because that's not common for a monograph. It's more of a catalog thing, right? But for me, it was really important, like, to locate myself within the work, and these sort of like CVs are such a strange sort of like listing of accomplishments and your educational achievement, and that is really central to the work. So having this in here felt important.
Yeah, and I think you know, to go back to that chapter, you know, that specific chapter, for example, that we were talking about, like, you know, on you know, if you are to read the contents page and to take Living Trust to be a very literal monograph, you would expect that section to only include these pictures of vegetable gardens from preparatory schools. And so I think there's also always this kind of like, you know, these like slight suggestions within the presentation of the book and the work that there are other narratives and other dialogues that are, you know, that are kind of hidden underneath the, you know, underneath the surface of the design. And so, yeah, I love the fact that you quite often have something unexpected that appears within some of those chapters. Or, for example, the chapter Sierra gymnastics routine is just one picture, right? And that was like very intentional to make you also, hopefully as a reader, think about what, you know, what is that process of chaptering and of categorizing and of kind of, you know, giving reference and meaning through, you know, through those choices. And obviously for Buck, you know, for you, Buck, I feel like titling is another one of those places where you really, really strongly, you know, lean into and engage with that, you know, the different strata of how you can read, you know, you can read some of these pictures. I wonder, I mean, for example, the ones you have up right now, I think are a great, you know, a good example of that.
Right. This is another chapter similar to the
As
one
Modesty. Yeah.
Modesty. Again, also a former exhibition title, but I just love that word in relationship to the whole theme that we're talking about. And then again, like, I think you can sort of see that we're playing with the idea of chapter because there's also a body of work within this chapter. So these are all images shot in Malibu in this, so the coastal line in California is public, it must be legally, and yet there's a sort of stretch called Billionaires Row in Malibu where they've taken like lots of pains to make the beach access like extremely difficult to the public, like fake signs and fake gates and stuff. And so these are all shot, and then there's this sort of asinine laws about like how close you can stand to the shoreline versus someone's property. So these are all shot. I was interested in this idea of this like privileged view. So I'm standing with the camera like a couple feet over into their property line. And so this idea of like, this is probably the most banal image that a photographer could ever make, right? Like a wave. And yet there's this idea of like, oh, this actually is technically only supposed to be seen by the people who own these homes. And then with that, we built it out to include images that might evoke the people that live in Malibu. And that for me was it was such a like groundbreaking thing because as an artist, I don't work in series that way very often. So to be able to then put it back into, like you're saying, a chapter, or we did really think about yearbook. That's such a good good note. Now, the size of it was that was sort of, I think, what we were going for, no?
For sure. And maybe, I mean, maybe this would be a good point also to talk about the actual title of the book as well, Buck.
Yeah, I had quite, that was one of my questions for you, was the title of the book. And it goes into the titles of the sections too, because it can mean so many different things, the Living Trust.
So Living Trust is a financial vehicle. I'm not an accountant or a lawyer, but the long and short of it, as I understand it, is to protect your assets while you're still alive, you form a trust. And let me just skip to the title page. This is going to go quickly. Also, apologies, there's like some strange part of another PDF in here, so this is not part of the book, sorry. And so, for example, if I were to buy a property in a living trust, it would be listed on the property deed as such. So it'd be my name with this comma, and then it would say living trust. And I thought, like, this comes up again and again in my work. Like tender option is another one of these. It's a financial term, and it means that, and yet it also has this, for me, a very evocative, emotional sort of second valence, right? Like living, and the idea of just trust in general is so interesting.
Totally. Yeah, and I love that. That yeah, this is perfect to how so much of your work can be read where there's one surface reading, and you could look at this title and think, yeah, it was about Buck's living trust. You're like your portfolio of of assets or whatever. But then it also has this other extra meaning, and I think that's also why it felt important to us when we were all collaborating to put all those titles on the end deliberately on the on the back of the book too. You have, I mean, I can also, Buck, to save you the time, I can also, I don't know if people can see my screen right now, but you can you can see it right there. We very deliberately actually jumbled those titles together and used these semicolons to kind of hint a little bit, I think, about how language can have all of these different readings when placed next to one another or separated. Yeah,
so tender option is another example of that. There's lots of them though, like shares, trusts, bonds, even stock, like but yeah, you guys really pushed me. Like I remember we had a conversation, I was really uncomfortable with the idea of it being written this way with the comma, because it's like really gnarly, but we really went for it in terms of it just being like as annoying as possible on some level. So another thing maybe we can talk about now is like the colors. All the colors are very pointed. So the cover with the fabric is meant to evoke a men's Oxford shirt, and Oxford shirts have a really interesting history of being sort of like the first performance fabric, which is also referenced in one of the chapters. So they were developed for polo matches because the buttons on the collars wouldn't fly up while you're playing polo. In this light pink, I feel like exists only in a very specific realm of masculinity, sort of a banker thing. And then green, we talked about a lot, this sort of shade of hunter green as being, my mother said it's like the least relatable color in color theory. So it's
the least relatable, is that it?
Yes, I remember.
And then we were talking about it, and it's also sort of like this strange elite color. So it's used often to signal, like, just to list some brands that use it: First Republic Bank, Rolex, Longchamp, Range Rover, Dartmouth College. So, I mean, even in that list, we're very much in the universe of the work. So that was another choice.
That's something that's talked about in the three essays that are in the book, which I find really interesting. But talking about all these codes, and this is what this work all seems to be about, these codes that only a certain class of people will understand.
Right.
Like the pink that you're talking about, or and the fleece.
Yeah, green again.
But I'm going into these essays. I really liked the essays are really wonderful, very interesting, and I wanted to find out how did you come about deciding where to place them in the book? So I thought it was really interesting how they were interspersed throughout the photographs and at the ends of certain sections. And I really liked that there were archival images that went along with the texts. And I can see in your PDF that they were supposed to be much more present.
Sorry, we should take that out. That was totally unrelated, but yes, they.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because I thought that these archival images really added something to the work. I found that really interesting. Not only to have these texts, that go along with it, but also to have these images which add a lot to how you read the images of the girls playing lacrosse. I thought that was really important that it exists in the book.
Yeah, maybe we can talk. That's probably the best.
Yeah, definitely.
That body of work requires.
It's a beautiful essay.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Orit Gat. She's amazing. And yeah, Louis, why don't you talk about it? Because I really feel like this was your zone. And it was so cool the way you did it.
With the essays, I think it's maybe important to talk as well, maybe afterwards, about how I think as soon as we started talking to you, Buck, it was it was super interesting how you yourself have these kind of image banks that you're kind of collecting and referencing within every picture you compose, and there's a huge kind of like behind the scenes kind of process of scrapbooking and collating information that really that leads to how a lot of the pictures are executed. And so yeah, with Orit's essay, this was an interesting one because the three essays, I think we really like how they all have a very different quality to them, because as you can see by those other PDF pages after this that aren't really supposed to be in here, like they, you and Orit had already constructed this wonderful piece of text that helped to basically explain what's going on in this opening section of these teenage girls playing lacrosse, which is a stolen Native American war ritual and sport, and was turned into something of the elite. And if I'm right in thinking, they're playing on Native American land as well, right? And
yes.
So all of those little images that you find alongside Orit's essay, they hint at those little things. You have the family tree of the Taft family, who are one of the founders of one of the private schools that were playing within the book. And I mean, you'll have to remind me all of the links within that family tree, but I remember it was vast. And so even though information like that can feel slightly tangential, it all kind of flows together into thinking about how these small different like elements of privilege can influence something as kind of enormous as the existence of an entire sport. And then what else have we got? We've got so 1 and 2, they are the two schools, right? Hotchkiss, who were manufacturing bullets and weaponry, and then the Taft family, which you've got it here, all these secretaries of agriculture, presidents and chief justices. And so there's already this level of kind of power and privilege baked into the names emblazoned on the front of the very sports players. And so I think we were really insistent right from the beginning with these texts that it was important to contextualize and to bring that stuff in. And likewise with Lucy's text, which was one that was more kind of specifically commissioned as we kind of embarked on the book, to have that little J. Crew advert that just immediately enters you into this world, it speaks, it kind of speaks volumes, I think, alongside her fantastic text, which, I love how she relates personal experience and even her own kind of childhood alongside the kind of more conceptual elements that are existing within the work.
Yeah. This is just a fun anecdote, but that guy on the left is Matthew Barney, the artist. He's
I don't remember you telling us that.
Crew model and football player at Yale. So, and yeah, the choice of where to place them. I also loved where they sat in the book. So, for example, this one speaks quite a bit about this body of work after Tender Option, which deals with some of these staged families of the DeVos Prince political dynasty. So we put this before the text, this chapter, which I really liked because those images require a lot of reading. And then, yeah, I think we were pretty...
But maybe to also discuss Brooke's text too, you know, this is also interesting because maybe in some way Brooke's text is an example of actually taking some of your background research and actually putting it at the forefront of the book, right? Because but Brooke Harrington's text is actually an excerpt of an existing book. She's a fantastic sociologist, and this was something where you, Buck, kind of said to us, you know, this text, it's parallel, you know, it doesn't directly and explicitly, it doesn't discuss your work, but it has many themes present in it that you know, that tie into lots of things that you're thinking about. So maybe you could explain a little bit as well what that, you know, what's going on in that text too, because I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I really wanted this text, and thank you guys for going after her. And I know that we because I mean, I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. So she spent years, she's a sociologist, but she trained to become a wealth manager for these ultra high net worth families. And the managers deal with everything from, you know, setting up trusts for your second family, to putting assets in the Cook Islands, to, I don't know, getting you a helicopter. And so they have this very intimate relationship with people who most of us have very little access to. And this chapter, this little excerpt talks about the ways that the wealth managers signal that they might be trustworthy people to these people. And so these distinctions can be literally inaudible in that they extend to special ways of using language that would pass unnoticed by all but a select few. So that's like already 100% what the book's about. As James, a London wealth manager, said, you, as an American, probably don't hear it, but anyone in this country would be able to tell that from the way I speak that I went to an independent school because I have this characteristic accent. Clients notice. So yeah, it's just, that's a good one. So
Yeah.
Really happy to have that text.
And what's it called? Yeah, it's called Capital Without Borders. Is that it? The name of the text.
Right.
And
And then,
you know, I just love this idea. You know, so much of your pictures have this excerpting that happens in them already, where you're finding an existing image or reference and incorporating it into the photographic process. And so to actually bring one of those texts into the book felt like the kind of cherry on the cake with like these elements of context. And actually maybe it is worth, because that text comes just after the performance fleece images, doesn't it? And right. I think maybe it's worth just briefly explaining those images, because they're almost, in some ways, they're the most obvious and open, because it's just this cheesy smiling guy. But then there's also this other kind of like funny idea of language that's very baked into these 5 or so pictures.
Yeah, and then we also have like the cover colors in this. So
yeah.
This model is wearing all 5 colorways of a performance fleece pullover from this company, Vineyard Vines, which is like ultra American. It was founded by 2 brothers that worked in finance and then moved to Martha's Vineyard, which is a sort of like storied vacation area off the coast of Massachusetts. And they began producing this sort of like really preppy day wear. And so their logo has this pink, and then the names of all the colors have this sort of nautical theme. I'm sorry, my dog's...
Is it your puppy? Buck has a very, very cute new puppy, everyone. So you have to... that's banging.
Yeah, and then fleece, these kind of fleeces also have this sort of like really intense connotation of, it's like what bankers wear, and there's all these jokes and memes about it. But I liked just having this guy in there.
Well, for me, it's also the titles too, right? Because you've got Hull Blue, you've got Deep Bay and Starboard. And so there's this kind of like reference out to a nautical life, right? And who can, you know, who can afford that, you know, and the fact that the color, you know, it doesn't say green, it says starboard. And so there's just
Right.
like those kind of signifiers about, you know, in Brooke's text about accent or about, you know, the type of suit that you wear or something, there are these very small kind of yeah, dog whistles almost that immediately make the work appear to be yeah, to kind of enter this specific space.
Well, it kind of goes back to the whole catalog idea also. It's those the color names in a J. Crew catalog or this sort of thing, where it's very coded language. You know, that it's not just green, but it's hunter's green, or I don't know what they call that color, pink, but it gives a very specific, you know, classifies it. It enters the color into a certain class of person.
Yeah, and actually, in fact, I've never thought before about how hunter green. I mean, it literally has the words, I mean, hunter within it. Like, it's never really even crossed my mind before, and it immediately, yeah, has this connotation.
Well, that was what I really liked about the second article. What's her name?
Lucy Ives.
Where she does talk about that, her whole experience of growing up with these catalogs and the Ralph Lauren ads, the J. Crew catalogs, and not really understanding the codes, but knowing that that it was very seductive, not knowing that it was all made to be that way, making her want to have something that she didn't have. And that it talked about class, and when you're a child, you don't really understand all these codes. And I feel like everything about the book kind of talks about that, all these codes that if you don't know what it is, it still is seductive. And I wanted to know if you could talk about the Christmas family, the Christmas cards.
Sure.
The family Christmas cards, because I find these really, they're really funny, and I really like how they're placed in the book, and that we do see it's the same. It takes a few times of looking at them to realize that they're the same people.
I remember we didn't even realise at first until we were putting them together, or I didn't. I think maybe you did. I was being a bit slow. I remember not even noticing.
Laurel, it's such a good observation about kids. Sorry to interrupt, but if you'll notice, there's lots of kids in the work.
Yeah, there are lots of kids, and how could, you know, it's no one's, and we did have this, I had this discussion here with our intern, who's really wonderful. We were discussing this because the codes that are in this book are all about the American upper class, which is going to be read differently by someone that hasn't grown up in that culture. So, of course, Agathe, she's French, and so she didn't have she's not from America. She doesn't know about all these cultural codes. The codes are different here for the class system. And so we did talk about that, and I was trying to explain what all these codes would be. You know, she didn't grow up with all these J. Crew catalogs and all that. Also, these Christmas cards, maybe it's off topic, but it made me think about those Kardashian family Christmas cards that they come out with every year. The photographs that they do as a family. And it really made me think about how this whole image, the idea of the perfect family, the perfect upper class family, which was then put into all of these catalogs and ads to sell clothing, to sell an idea. And now it's filtered into every aspect of culture, and that everyone wants to have this kind of crazy, perfect family photo in the Christmas card. It just made me think, I thought about that when I was looking at these pictures. They just seem so ridiculous.
They are. Yeah, a couple things there. I mean, one thing that I think is really troubling in American popular culture is we're often presented this family as middle class, which is really points to like just in any sort of like movie, or I notice this a lot, lots of teenage movies, especially like with no explanation, like the family's house is just like massive and in Malibu, and like that's presented as normal. So I think that's very nefarious. And then the other thing that, and Lucy touches on this, the advertisements we see of families, I'm so sorry, are of people who have never even met until the day of the shoot.
Right.
So this whole thing that we're killing ourselves to try to replicate is also in some perverse level, like these people don't know each other. So in these particular images, there's 3 of them. This is my family, but I cast everyone with professional actors and models, right? So I have 2 brothers, a sister, and then this young man here stands in for nieces and nephews. And then I have 2 parents here on the side. And that was a fun way of working. It was interesting to get, I got all these casting emails like, this guy would be perfect for the role of Buck, which is weird. And yeah, but these people don't know each other. So, and another thing, and this happens in a lot of advertisements, this also happened in this image, like this image as such never existed. So these are all composites. Like anyone who's taken a group photo before knows that like someone's eyes will probably be closed or messed up. So my printer and I go in after and we'll put in heads from 3 different photos to get this sort of perfect Frankenstein image.
So all of the images in the book exist as large-scale images that you show in exhibitions.
Correct.
So how has this changed how you view your work, seeing it in a book form?
It's been great. It's been, honestly, it's been so nice to have it grouped together this way. It really, it helped me understand what I was doing in a totally new way. So thank you guys for that. And I love this index. This is fully Sarah and Lewis is doing, but we see here the relationship in size between the images in the physical world. So
yeah, I remember you saying this is a bit of an eye-opener, seeing how how different stuff is scaled. Because, for example, the daughters ones, I think it's really important to understand that those pictures are like 2 meters tall, right?
Yeah, they're
they're absolutely huge. It's like you're inside the game.
Mm-hmm. But in some ways, it doesn't really matter because we're seeing these as something else. It's in the book. It becomes something completely different in the book, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this when we were making it. And I think I was always someone, who is schooled or who thinks about their work in terms of exhibitions. And I had never, I love books, but I had never thought so much about what putting them into a book would do and how I would feel about that. So this has been such a...
I think it's also just that it is important, like how your images acknowledge all of these different contexts, like within the way that you make them, but to actually also think about how those images circulate in different formats. And so to put everything into that index was an interesting thing to do. Laura, I just seen in the chat that we have some questions. Yeah, we've Matthew is saying there's a couple of questions, so maybe we should move to them.
They all seem like questions that are kind of, somebody just asked the name of the book, Living Trust. There aren't any real questions of, you just talked about, someone wanted to know the inspiration of the work, but you did already discuss that. Also, what the perception response has been.
To the book?
I guess that's, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, it's an interesting year to release a book, right? Because a huge place for us as publishers to understand a response to a book is in these physical events and book fairs and launches and yada, yada, yada that normally happen, where you do really get to see people have that tangible, like first reading and first reaction of a project. And so in some ways, I kind of feel like I'm still waiting for that moment, that kind of, moment of seeing the work encountered by people outside of the process, or maybe who haven't been on, you know, Buck's website or the Loose Joints website, or you know already had, or a press article for that matter, and who actually just get to kind of encounter the work, you know, fresh in a, you know, outside of all of those other connotations.
We're not gonna, I think we don't have too much time left, and I just wanted to ask Buck a question, because I saw on your Instagram feed that you're working on a different project concerning 18th century portraiture, I think. Is that right?
Yes, that's.
It seems like that's something that would be very interesting in that this new body of work, if you would think about how that would work in a book form also.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're already thinking about that now that you have one book, if that's opened up your mind as to how you approach your new work, is how it would work in a book form and not just as exhibition photography.
Absolutely. It's been such a joy. And it really, for me, is just like, it's such a luxury to just have your work seen through the eyes of two other people whose sort of aesthetic and opinion you admire and who really understand it. That has been such a joy. So thank you guys. And I really enjoyed, making the book. I feel like I learned so much about my work from doing it. I mean, especially the day when we looked at everything on the table. That was also very humbling and strange. Yeah, books are great. I mean, obviously it's incredible to have something physical that you can hold in your hand. And then I really like, I think one other thing we could maybe mention is like the font, even things like the font. We went on the websites of all these private banks.
Yeah.
So
We had lots of fun picking the font for this one. That's true. We probably went through about 30 different options and literally, you know, had Buck pulling up all of these reference points of everything. Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. Investment banks and wealth managers and all of these things. And eventually, yeah, we centered on this font called Burgess, which is kind of it's a little bit of a modification of some of the original drawings for Times and for Times New Roman, which has obviously become ubiquitous. But something about this font, it has a little bit of a kind of, maybe a slight kind of yuppie feel to it, that in some of the curves and the kind of thick and squatness of a lot of the lettering. And this, I remember we literally, you know, had pages of fonts and were scribbling and circling all of them until we came down to our final selection. And yeah, that was, I think we hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And I appreciate your guys taking I don't know, being able to step back, because I had been approached previously and had spoken with other designers, and I think it's often like it's a real delicate balance of letting both parties do their work. And for example, like having things like in cursive, upside down and red for no reason, like really, you know, I really wanted this to look like a brochure, and you guys were on board with that. So that was great.
Well, that makes me think about something that I think is really important. When a book is really good, it's because the collaborative work of the designer, the artist, that everything has been in sync, that there is nothing out of place, that everything has been chosen for a reason, and the reason being to uphold the concept of the artist. So I feel like everything about the aesthetic choices of this book, everything was chosen for a reason, and I think that's what makes the book really strong, so that you enter into the concept very quickly, and it really makes you you become part of the experience. You like I said, it's like the yearbook. It's like, it feels like it's something that exists outside of the idea of a monograph. It really does feel like it's a storybook.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for this fantastic talk. It was very, very interesting. There were many questions we could not answer. I'm very sorry. I will send them over. And thank you very much again.